Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to Modelling for Beginners with the Airfix Mosquito PR16. So if you remember from the last episode, all the fuselages together, and we skipped forward a few steps on the instructions to fit that Bombay panel to make our lives easier for the filling and sanding that was needed around that. I have in the meantime also filled and sanded the tailplane leading edges. There is a touch, a very small touch of filler in there. It really isn't much, but they are cleaned up and ready to go, ready to fit. They do fit beautifully, so I will not fit them yet. There's no need. I'll just prove that with this further dry fit. They push into place quite nicely, and even without any glue at all, they fit really nicely, and they align quite well too. So really no need to worry about fitting those at this stage, so they can just sit out of the way. Okay, so the belly then, that was Mr. Surfaced when you last saw it. I have sanded that off with wet and dry, and I've actually rescribed around the outside as well. And what I'm quickly going to show you now is just rescribing the middle, because actually it's probably not a big surprise really to anyone that these Bombay doors should still be Bombay doors. Airfix have supplied a one-piece fitting here with no depiction of the break between the two doors, and I thought to myself, that doesn't seem logical to me, especially given that there are apparently cameras in the forward end. You would think that the bomb doors would still open. So I did a quick Google, and I've got this beautiful period picture of a British one, and if I zoom that up, you can quite clearly see that the bomb doors are in fact still two panels, and some really quite beautiful weathering as well. Anyhow, so how are we going to put this nice straight line back in there? Forewarned is forearmed, and I would suggest actually that it might be easier for some to scribe that line in before you ever fit this panel. So if the build alongs are far enough behind, they might want to do that, or if you obviously come to this later on, it might be worth looking at that. So we're going to scribe that in. This is my scriber, the tiny Alpha P-Cutter 800. There is a smaller size version of this available out there, which the Tamiya scriber is actually an Alpha, the small size one, but this is the one I use. And I'm going to need some kind of guide here, because there's quite a long straight line and there's nothing to follow. Now I know a lot of modelers use Dymo tape or similar as a guide for scribing. I don't, because it's a pain in the bum to work with, and also really difficult to get hold of nowadays because nobody does Dymo labels anymore. So I actually just use Tamiya tape, and I'll show you what I'm on about. Don scientist glasses. Right, so I need to just map out a line down the middle. I've made the piece of tape over long so I can use the fuselage centre seam as a guide. So I'll line that end up on there, and grab the front end and pull it reasonably taut. You don't need to stretch the life out of it, but just pull it reasonably taut and line up the front, and then I'll do that again at the back, and bish bash bosh, a nice straight line following the centre of this Bombay area. Now clearly, if you're going to wander with the scriber, the Tamiya tape isn't going to stop you from wandering, but I actually am essentially just using it as a guide, as a visual guide. The blade will butt up to the tape edge quite happily, of course, but if it's going to wander, the tape won't stop it wandering, so the onus is on you as the user to actually scribe a straight line, but it's much easier to do that with a guide. And here we go. And one thing that is often commented on when I do scribing demos, like every time, is that I go forwards. What the heck, Jen, why are you going forwards? Well, the answer is very easy, because if I go forwards I can see where I'm going. if you scribe this way, it's harder to see where you're going a lot of the time, and the tool's a lot more prone to wiggling around actually when you drag it backwards than it is if you push it forward. As usual, I'm using my other fingers to brace myself on the side of the fuselage. I'm not applying a lot of pressure at all. And there you go, I just cut a nice little line in. And that's that done. Now once it's in, there you go. You can of course, now that the line is there to follow, go back in and deepen it to your heart's content and get it to where you want it. And then now that there is a line there, you can drag backwards to deepen the line if you want. But ultimately, just run up and down there until you get that panel line where you want it. Whatever that want is, you might not be bothered. You might not even want the panel line. I don't mind. And that brings us back to steps 21 onwards with the wing building. Undercarriage, wing, nacelle, exhausts, etc. All built through the next sort of 30 odd stages to end up with a complete wing and nacelle unit that can be plugged onto the side of the fuselage. Now, I did go ahead here. What I have here is the right hand wing, and in a moment we'll look at the parts and a little bit of the work to actually get to this stage. So the undercarriage legs all put together, these fit into the bottom of the wing like so, and importantly it is entirely possible to fit them after the nacelle itself is in place. That's important. But anyway, the wing itself, here we go. I've used the foil in that landing lamp, and it's all gone together quite nicely really. I did find there are some ejector pin scars on the inner surface of the lower wing. See them all along that trailing edge there? May or may not be obvious from the footage that those stick up. There's all sorts of lumps and sort of marring in that surface. There we go. This one, this one, this one and this one, which if they're not removed and smoothed out, mean that a gap will be had at the trailing edge. Thus. This one is not nearly as bad as this one was, but it's bad enough that you can physically see those, and those did need cleaning up. Other than that, I found that the insert where you could fit a landing light didn't fit very well. As you can see, that does have filler on both sides. And the entire wingtip is clear. Some like this approach because it's easier than adding a tiny light at a later stage. I'm not convinced personally. You still need to mask the lens, and actually this doesn't fit great. There is no real sort of massively obvious joint there on the real thing, but unfortunately there is. As you can see, this I've used Mr. Surfacer to blend this in. It's not perfect, in fact it's a long way from perfect, but it'll do. And we do, obviously, there's a bit of filler up that leading edge as well. So that's that piece. The wheel is just two halves, that's pretty self-explanatory. And a nacelle, a couple of bulkheads. The carb intake is separate, and you've got separate drop-in pieces for these vents on the front here. It all goes together pretty decently. This front insert here, the actual chin intake, is okay, but it's not brilliant. However, there is a joint there on the real thing, so we can live with that. that just gives an idea of the work there. You will note that I did not bother with this assembly here for attaching the spinner at a later time, because I'm going to attach that with glue. Sorry, I don't see the point of mucking around with spinning things, because I don't need it to spin, and they never fit. They're always a little bit sloppy when you do that, so I'm not going to bother. And then you've got the exhaust pieces here, which come complete with a little sort of section, which gives a very vague impression of being attached to something rather than just being stuck in a slot. Right then, just quickly, I'm not going to go into super detail because this is at the end of the day just gluing pieces together, but the biggest thing I wanted to show really was the actual undercarriage legs themselves, because these are the fiddliest part, and it is quite novel the way Airfix have chosen to show this to be done. So first off then we need the parts. For this one we're looking at F36 and F37, you can see them here, and I'm just going to show a little bit here to illustrate why these slim ended nippers really are the way forward with modelling, and it really does come to the fore with small parts like this, because you can see how flimsy that actually is. So if you watch very carefully as I snip here, you may see, not really, when you cut with a nipper, no matter what nipper it is, single-sided, double-sided, it doesn't matter. When you make that cut, it deflects the part. Because of the thickness of these cutting blades, as they come together in the plastic, the net result is that they push that part away like this. It's hard to see because it's not a very great distance, but that happens. So with small fragile parts like this, if you're not careful, see if it's visible, if you're not careful how you approach cutting them out, you will break them by the simple act of cutting them free from the sprue, which is clearly not ideal. So always bear that in mind when you're cutting any part away from the sprue. Look at the attachment points of that part to the surrounding frame and figure out a way that when you cut it with your nippers, you're not, there aren't any more like it on here, but you're not placing undue stresses onto that part with that very slight bend that the nippers will impart into it. And if you find that a part is attached in such a way, this isn't by the way, but I'll show you what I mean. If you find that a part is attached in such a way that there really isn't a way to cut it without placing a lot of stress on the part, then simply remove the stress from the part by cutting it elsewhere. So let's cut through here, and let's cut through here and here. And now when you want to cut the part away, it's not being held in place by that sort of relatively rigid external framework of the sprue, so that when you do finally come in and cut the part itself free, there's no drama at all. It's one of those little things, it doesn't sound like much or a big deal, but it's just one of those things that with a little bit of forward planning and the right tools, you can just avoid all kinds of issues, particularly with these modern 172 kits with lots and lots of detail and the finesse of some of the moulding. You know, you look at your Armour Hobby and Edward type kits, all the tiny parts that they have, thinking ahead, thinking about your cutting and planning forward to avoid adding that stress into the mix can make a very big difference to how things turn out. I am going to shut up now and snip free the rest of the parts that I need, and then I'll show you how this goes together. Right, just quickly before I put the undercarriage in, here I have now cleaned up all those bumps and lumps in there. I just sliced them with the scalpel first. If you hold the scalpel flat on this area, if there is anything raised, the blade will naturally just pick it up, clean it down, and then just use a sanding board and just tickle it to get all of that gone and smooth. And in addition to that, the two weights for the camera, the two forward locating recesses, I have trimmed them down. So if you look at the rear ones, you can see that they're kind of proud to meet up with the lower wing parts. These though are too proud, so I just trim them back at a slight angle from the leading edge to get them out of the way, and the net result of all of that 2 minutes work is pretty much perfect leading edge fit and no gap on the trailing edge. So that's that part. So the undercarriage then, here we are, we have 9 parts to make up one undercarriage unit, and I'm going to assume that when built they're slightly handed, so keep this one where it lives and don't get it mixed up. Now the novel thing about this, if you were to try and assemble this freehand, you absolutely could do it, of course, but it would be quite fiddly, no doubt about it. And what the Airfix designer had the thought to do was to recommend the use of the lower wing part as a holding tool or a jig. Of course, this isn't revolutionary. We did it at the beginning of the series with the fuselage parts, didn't we? But here the designers are actually encouraging the use of the wing to help. So it does say throughout, do not glue. If you really want to glue it into position at this stage, you could. It's not going to be a problem for anything other than painting access. So I'll align this a la the instruction booklet, and the first thing you have to do is attach this brace to the outer leg. And the outer leg is this one. Now we don't actually need it in the jig to do this, but the wing part to do this, but that is holding it in position. However, I'm going to take it off because it's just a little bit easier for me anyway to fidget this into position. That's the wrong glue. Where's the good one? It's hiding behind my script. I just dot a little bit of glue onto each one of those locating points. They're just flat discs. Make sure I get it the right way around, which looks wrong. Kind of sticks forward. Just pop that into position. And then a little glue onto the lower mounting point as well. There we go, that's in. And then we'll pop that into the wing so it can be dry. And the other side has to have this little arm fitted to its inside. So again, I'm looking at the instruction pictures just to figure out the orientation of this. So the long end goes uppermost. Stick that into its slots and glue it once it's already in situ. It's just easier that way. Thus. And then this goes into here as well, jockeying it into position so as not to actually destroy the alignment of what we already glued. And there's lots and lots of slack and play here, so there's not really anything to worry about. And once it's in position, I'm going to use one finger just to hold the forward ends of the legs down into the wing, and let that pull itself into alignment with that front piece, and then touch a little glue onto the 3 fixing points for that little front brace, and then just a little squeeze. I'm being ever so gentle so that all 3 are touching, and leave that a few minutes just to set up a tad. It's one of those where if you continue to try and introduce more parts before the glue's had a few minutes, you're just going to pull everything to bits and they'll end up worse off than when you started. Next up, just the small crossbar. This is part F18. Just a smidge of glue and then pop that into position. Thus, and once it's in place and straight, there we go. Just a touch more adhesive on that. Onto that fits the mudguard assembly. One of the few aircraft ever to have had mudguards. There are square posts just here where the front part goes, and then the curved bit on the little bracket there goes onto the crossbar that was just fitted. And again, it's a tiny bit fiddly, I won't lie, but just be gentle and be patient. If you're not gentle, you're going to break apart everything you've already made. Just get that to sit on that little bit of glue that was put there, and once it's in and you're happy with that, it is aligned and touching everywhere it should, and go back in with a little extra thin, and that'll lock it in like so. And the last part is the oil tank. This fits up from the top. I'm not going to fit that for now, because what I need to do now is just leave this assembly in the wing as it is here and just let that glue set up. And as fiddly as that was using the wing as a jig, you can imagine quite easily, I think, how much of a monster faff that would have been doing it freehand, I think. So the exhaust is another curious one. I'm not entirely sure why Airfix felt the need to split them like this, but they have, and it initially looks a bit fiddly and a bit faffy, but it's actually not that bad when you get down to it. It is important though to follow the numbers to try and ensure you get everything the right way around. And amusingly, the most handed pieces of all, the actual sort of little brackets that the exhausts go into, are not numbered outside of the sprue. They do have arrows on them, but they're not numbered, so you might want to scratch them or something so that you know which is which, just in case you think you might have problems, something like that. I've just written 1X in there, so I know this is part number 9. Now I found with the ones for the other wing that there were some mould artefacts on these edges, some lumps on these edges which impeded the fit dramatically. This one is perfectly fine, no need for clean up on that. And actually this one is too, so it's potentially just the ones for the right hand wing that were an issue. But let's get these knobs tidied off here. And when you have the parts cleaned up and in your hands, it's really quite obvious how they fit together. They're kind of castellated in the back and they sandwich together quite happily. I mean, they won't just sit, so I can't show you them just sitting together, but get them into position and just put a tiny bit of glue and try to put it somewhere where it isn't going to immediately run out onto your fingertips and ruin the actual exhaust stubs. And once there's that little bit of glue, you can just fidget everything into position properly and then fully glue the whole thing, and it ends up looking like that. Not really a big issue at all. And once it's dry and you're ready, it fits in to its little holder like that. I don't think there's any real need to specifically detail the construction of the nacelle or indeed the wheels. It's all just gluing things together, and I did find everything did fit quite well. There were again a few small, has this one got them? Yes. These parts do benefit from a little bit of light preparation of the mating surfaces. There are a few lumps and bumps on there that will translate to gaps if you're not careful, but on the whole the fit of everything here is perfectly adequate. I haven't done anything specific or special that's any different to the way I've assembled any of the rest of this so far. So as I say, I don't think there's any real need to specifically detail the actual construction and filling of that. It's all been done in exactly the same way as the fuselage and everything else. And likewise the wing parts themselves. I added foil to the back of the lamp lens, which is added through here. As I stated, the clear part is blended with Mr. Surfacer, and otherwise it's been assembled with liquid cement and filled with the black super glue. But when you get to the end of this, you have to assemble the nacelle to the wing part. And straight away we've got a huge issue, because we cannot fit the exhausts after the fact. There is no access down here and there's no access up here. We have to fit our completed exhaust assemblies into the model like this. Note the directional arrows, and then fit the nacelle to the wing, and I obviously can't do that dry. So it begs the question, and this is where we need to think ahead with modelling again. How on earth are we going to neatly paint our colour around those exhausts, and indeed the exhausts around the colour? That is going to be a pain, is it not? Yes, roared the crowd. So, top tip incoming. What we're going to do is we're going to paint this first. And there's a lesson here that I've learned, which again I can show you for the construction of your wings. Let's get everything out of the way a little bit. So I need to paint this area ahead of time so that I can mask the whole lot off instead of trying to mask around some fiddly little exhausts and whatnot. So I'm going to paint the thing PRU blue because that's what we're doing. I'm going to get a piece of tissue on my black building mat and we'll zoom down some. The paint I'm going to use on this build, on this occasion, is a new one to me, and this will be the first time I've used it. So we can learn the paint together, and I'm going to use this SMS, Scale Modeller's Supply. Premium. For the modeller, by the modeller. This is from Australia. Scalemodeller.com.au. Australian made and owned. And it's a lacquer type paint. It's labelled here as acrylic lacquer flat, and this one is BS636 PRU blue. Anybody who's built anything PRU before will already know that pre-mixed PRU blue is not a common shade amongst model paints, and you always end up mixing it yourself. You can mix it though using Tamiya. If you start off with XF18, which is intermediate style blue, and you just put some grey and bits and pieces in it, you can get a reasonable approximation of PRU blue from that. So this is ready for airbrush use. So I've already shook it and stirred it before I started, and it did need a lot. And you need to shake it until it's thoroughly mixed everywhere, and it does take some time. Okay, and I'm going to use it straight from the jar because it says I can. See how it goes. Pop a bit in there. Right, all I need to do is just spray enough of the area around the exhaust so that I can easily mask the whole thing. So logically, if I in fact paint that entire panel, thus, that means that when I come to paint the rest of the model, those exhausts will already be fitted, and I can just actually mask off that entire nacelle panel, including the exhaust, which is massively easier than trying to mask off just the exhausts themselves. Just from that quick spray, bearing in mind I'm using Revolution CR by Iwata, which is a 0.5mm needle and air cap setup, I think that's a tad thick as it comes. So before I paint the whole model, I will look into thinning that down, probably with some Mr. Colour, and see how that goes. For the purposes of what I'm doing right now though, that will suffice. The top tip I mentioned centres around the radiator inlets for these wings. Now you can see there is no radiator in there currently, and that's because it just slides in. It just slides in from this inboard end when you're ready, which is a really neat touch. However, I didn't think to paint in here beforehand, and I can see now that that's going to be quite difficult to do. So again, just paint that inner area now before you actually assemble the wings together. Like so. It's a few seconds work, and it will again make masking the area incredibly easy later on, because all you'll need to do is stuff a little bit of foam in there and not really worry about neat leading edges at all. This one I'm just going to sort of try and spray it in from the end here. Okay, so that's the nacelle sorted. So the exhausts themselves will need painting also, and here we're going to show another hot tip, I think. Right, I'm going to stick that down onto a bit of upside down tape on a stirrer, and we're just going to brush paint this with Mr. Metal Colour. This stuff is fabulous, absolutely brilliant. It's really expensive. I think it's about £3 a jar, but it is very, very good. And if you read the label there, it says it provides metallic feeling when the paint surface is polished. Okay. But I'm just going to brush paint it. So this is stainless, as you can see, but I don't personally think it looks much like stainless. But what it does look like is unblemished exhaust pipes to me. So the way I do it, I just grab a little bit of the sauce from the bottom and put it in the lid here. We are in shot, yes. You can see it's very, very thin. And literally just paint the area. You can spray it, but you don't need to. For little things like this, it will go on just fine with a brush. There we go. Just like that. This is an aggressively solvent based paint. You will need to use a proper lacquer thinner to clean your brushes using this, but it is absolutely brilliant, and it does polish like the old Humbrol metal coats back in the day. Once it's dry, you can give it a little buff, and it does polish up, although I almost never do that, to be honest. I have a little bit of the Tetracell standard thinners in it, you know. Oh, why have you just gone completely out of focus? Wow. I have a little bit of the old Tetracell standard thinners in an old badger jar. That's what I wash my paintbrushes out with. So, this dries in moments. And just to show where I'm going with this, that can now be glued in position, and we've got a painted exhaust and a painted side panel, and when it comes to fitting the whole thing together and painting the rest of the model, I can simply mask that entire nacelle panel, including the exhaust, paint around everything else, and job is a good one. So the last little part then, the radiator face, I've just sprayed that with some silver. I've used AK Extreme Metal, white metal. This is AK478, available from all the places you'd get AK from. This stuff is excellent. I really enjoy using it. Again, it's not super cheap, and again you do need to use lacquer thinners to clean it, and as you can see from the viscosity, it's very definitely meant for application by airbrush. I do love it. I would recommend using it. However, I would not recommend going out and buying the entire range and having it sat on yourself. I would recommend buying it as and when you need it, because the shelf life doesn't seem to be brilliant on it. So radiator, it's again got handy directional indicators on it. So this way's up, this way's in, and hopefully that'll just slide on into position without any bother, and indeed it does. Now, is that supposed to sit in between those lines or in front of them? Let's double check that. In the groove, idiot. In the groove, right at the front. Read the instructions, there we go. Oh yeah, obviously if you want to, a little touch of dark wash across there, you can do that before you fit it, or once it's in situ, it's no big drama. And the nacelle, so here it is. I've painted inside there, same interior green as the cockpit area, and I will carry out the same steps of a little bit of X22 and a little bit of wash, just to bring out that detail, which is why I'm not going to glue this nacelle into place right now, because I'll do that before I glue it. But just to show you how it looks, this is your completed wing with the nacelle and pre-painted areas. I am going to clearance this here a little bit because it is impeding the fit of the upper cowling a little bit, just a touch. It does squeeze down into position, but it wouldn't need to be squeezed if there was a little bit of material removed from the top of that exhaust mount, and it doesn't need to be there, so I'm just going to get rid of that. The fit everywhere else, as you can see, is exceptional, will not require filler. The fit along the top there won't require filler, it is a panel joint anyway. The only bit that will get filled is this area here. There isn't supposed to be a panel line just there, so I will fill that. So that will be the completed wing piece. You don't need to fit the undercarriage yet. As I said earlier, you can finagle that into position from the outside later on, and we will. Oops. And again, the fit of this completed wing and engine to the rest of the model is very, very good. So I might well leave the wings off as well for painting, because it'll be a lot easier to access this area here and this area here properly for painting and weathering without the wings actually final fitted. I'll see how I feel, because I do think actually the top joint, it may look slightly better just for application of some liquid glue along the join, and that's not something I would be wanting to do if I've painted everything already. So I don't know though, it's pretty damn good, isn't it? Okay, so I'll leave this episode there. My radiator's just dropped out, that's fine because we're going to do a wash. I'll finish both of these wings and get them both up to the stage you see this one at, although glued and washed, etc. And then we'll move on to the next phases of construction, which actually consults booklet. Finalisation of both wings takes us up to step 87. Which is actually almost there, because after that we've got some propellers to assemble, drop tanks, and then it's transparencies and details. So the next episode we'll wrap up the construction and start getting this thing ready for some paint, and we'll look at masking and things like that, all to come in the next one. So yeah, as ever, thank you everybody for all your support in all of the ways in which you offer it. The comments, the likes and shares of the videos, emails and messages which I receive offline. Huge thanks to the guys that are building along. I'm still getting your messages from you lot, and enjoying your progress as well. And a super big thanks to the people who donate directly to the channel with Buy Me a Coffee and with the super chat through YouTube. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to all of you. So with all of that said, it only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other. Genesis out.